He says the reason why I'm doing it is so you don't have to study it, Greek astronomy, even though the calculations, according to the Rambam, existed long before the Greeks even existed. In other words, the Jewish people had already calculated this, as we'll see soon. Okay, here we have the one mitzvah, and this is the mitzvah to know which day is Rosh Chodesh, and it's a mitzvah to calculate it. Okay, so the months of the year are the months of the Jewish people calculate are the lunar months, as it says. Okay, this is what the rabbi said. God showed Moses the new moon. Right? He took out, the Torah says, HaChodesh Hazah. The first mitzvah in the Torah says, this is the new moon. So the fact it says this is the new moon, the Torah is saying that God showed Moses the new moon on the first day of the month of Nisan. So look over there, that is a new moon. Whenever you see a new moon, then then you have to declare Rosh Chodesh. And then he said, so that is, he showed him the new moon. And he told him, this is, okay, and the years that we calculate are the solar years, as it says, Shamar es Chodesh Aviv. Now, we're going to talk about this mitzvah. There's mainly lunar, mitzvahs are related to the lunar calendar, but there's one mitzvah which is related to the solar calendar. We always have to make sure Passover ends up in spring. And spring, the equinoxes, solstices are all solar-based. How much more is there on a solar year than a lunar year? About 11 days. Now, don't worry if the Rambam is going to get down to the minute and second later on, but for now, it's about 11 days. When you gather this about 30 days or so, then you have to add another month. So let's just calculate it. So let's say you have about 10 days per year, right? So every 3 years, spring will fall in the lunar calendar. Spring will fall later and later, right? So therefore, every 3 years or so, we add a leap year, which is, so when these 11 days gather, these extra 11 days gather to around 30 days, we add a year. And then we have 13 months, and that's called a pregnant month, a Shana Muberes, a leap year. Pregnant means it has the extra potential, extra month. That's literally how you translate it. You can't have 12 months and so days. The Torah says you have to have Chad She'ashana. Everything has to be rounded to the month. So you can't say like, oh yeah, the last month is going to be 11 days. You have to have an extra month, and that's called the leap year. That's the year. This year is actually a leap year.
So you see the complete cycle of the month.
Yeah, so you have to have, a month has to be 29, 30 days. Well, as we'll say later, we don't calculate months by the hour. So because months aren't exactly 30 days or 29 days, they're actually 28 and a half days, and therefore the half days are always adding, et cetera, et cetera. That's why we have some months which are 30, some which are 29. We'll go through these calculations. The sun, the moon goes away every month, and you can't see it for like 2 days or even less, like 2 days or less or more. Like 1 day before the sun hits it at the end of the month, and 1 day after the sun hits it. And you can see it in the west at night. And the night you see it the west at night, this is the beginning of the new month. That's a new moon. So the moon disappears for a night and comes back a little bit, a sliver of the moon. That is a new month. And from that time, you count 29 days. And if you see it on the 30th day, then you have 30 days in the month, right? Then the Rosh Chodesh is, then you're going to, so this month now, yesterday, we had, 2 days ago and the day before, we had 2 days of Rosh Chodesh. That's that means 2 days of Rosh Chodesh means the previous month was 30 days. 1 day of Rosh Chodesh means the previous month was 29 days. Okay, and if you don't see it, then Rosh Chodesh will be on the 31st day, and the 30th day will be from the previous month. And now, again, this in its origin, as we'll say, the way we calculate the month is somebody sees a new moon. And we're going to say a bunch of laws about how you see the new moon. Nowadays, we have an automated system which will last forever until Mashiach comes. And once Mashiach comes, we can go back into the mitzvah of seeing the moon. Yeah. You have a hammer? Okay, so, and we, Okay. And if you don't see it, Rosh Chodesh will be the 31st day, and the 30th day will be from the previous month. And we don't need, so this is, we didn't see the new moon, so then we count it from the 31st day. And we don't need the moon on the 31st day because we know that the month of the cannot be more than 30 days. So if you see it, you declare it, and if you don't see it, then we know that the next day is beginning Rosh Chodesh. Okay, a month that has 29 days, and you see it on the night of the 30th, that's called a Chodesh Chaser. So if you see it on the night of the 30th and you declare Rosh Chodesh on the night of the 30th, that's called a lacking month. So that's a shortened month, 29 days. And then you'll see the month, and you see the moon the next night. So the 30th day from the previous Rosh Chodesh that's a Chodesh Chaser. And if you do not see it, and the previous month will have had 30 days, then that is a Chodesh Ma'ubar. That's a pregnant month. That month has an extra day. And that's considered a complete month. A moon that you see on the night of the 30th, this is called a moon that you see in its right time. And if it's seen on the 31st day and you don't see it on the 30th day, that is a month that you saw the moon on the extra day. The month is not given, seeing the new moon of the month is not given to everybody, like Shabbos Bereshis. So Shabbos, everybody counts 7 days, right? Rather, we don't have to declare a day of Shabbos. Everyone counts 7 days, and then that's your shot. You know it's Shabbos. And there's all sorts of different laws. However, like if you're lost in the forest and you don't know what day Shabbos is, you're supposed to count 7 days and keep Shabbos on that 7th day. However, this is given over only to the Bezdin. The Bezdin in Jerusalem, they have to declare it, and it has to be given to them. They are the only ones who can declare a new month. A Bezdin, they also do all mathematical, and they've always done all the mathematical calculations of when the new moon is going to be. And until they know if it's possible to see it that night or not. If they know it's possible to see, so they say, hey, we better gather together tonight. Hopefully someone will come and give testimony, because tonight it should be able to see. If they come and they follow the halacha of interrogating them, and what they're saying is truthful, then it's Rosh Chodesh. And if no one comes, or if they come and they're not telling the truth, etc., etc. So this is something that not a lot of people know. There are a lot of, I've seen different Jewish people nowadays who will say, hey, the month now, it's different. We have a better way of doing it now. We have the math. But that's really incorrect. They always had the math. In fact, they used the math in order to interrogate witnesses. That was the best way to interrogate them. They always had the math. They just had a mitzvah that it had to be done through people seeing it, because that's what God did with Moses. So, and so if they interrogate them, then they know they for sure saw it properly. Okay, it's a mitzvah on the Bezdin to know when the month is and to interrogate the witnesses. And then afterwards, the next part of the mitzvah is to go and share the information publicly, share it everywhere, send out people. And so everyone should know when the month is, when the holidays are, etc., etc. You do not set up the month except in Israel. So that's another thing. It has to be in Israel. As it says, the month has to be established in Israel and only in Jerusalem, and only then can it be sent everywhere else. But if you're a very, very wise person, and you are a rabbi from Israel who they relied on, then you went out of Chutz La'aretz, and in Israel there's no one like you, then you can do it outside of Israel. And once you know that there's someone in Israel who has the same capabilities as the guy who left Israel, like let's say he was like the head of the Sanhedrin and he had to leave and go to Bavel. Once you know that there's someone capable in Israel, so then you're no longer allowed to use him, and we have to rely on someone from Israel, because the only reason why we're using him is not by choice. We literally don't have a choice. We need someone to calculate it. All right, that's today's Rambam.
It is interesting that the new month in Judaism is a big deal.
Very big. I mean, if you think about it, all our holidays, everything revolves around it.
Yeah.
So I don't know if you remember, but in a mimer we learned a couple of years ago on Bereshis, the fifth Lubavitcher Rebbe, which the Rebbe quoted, had a totally different take on the first Rashi. Totally different take. He said, "What is HaChodesh Hazeh Lachem?" It says in the what? Well, do you keep touching the switch? No. Are you sure? Let me go. So there, the Midrash says that what happened when the Jewish people became the Jewish people, God said, now you keep a new month. You don't keep the solar. The solar represents nature. You guys are above nature. That's why Jewish people, our month is mitzvah based. We have to have. So in the mimer there, the Rebbe asks, he says, why do we start with Bereshis, which is nature, if really supernatural tendencies of Jewish people existed before the world, the souls, and we only introduce it. The new, in other words, Rosh Chodesh of the moon represents supernatural, and Jewish people survival is supernatural. So why don't we start from HaChodesh? Why don't we say, hey, we're Jewish people, we have a purpose in the world. We make it look like there's a world, and we were born naturally into the world, and we just like a random religion. What happened? Okay, sorry about that. So the month is everything, and it's almost like a chok. It's like you can't calculate the month. The Beis Din has to calculate the month, and if no one shows up, even though they know today naturally there's a new moon, they know there's a new moon. They can't declare a new moon until somebody goes outside and sees it and everything like that. So it is actually, and then you even have this midrash that says the angels say to God, like, when is the holiday going to be? And he says we have to go. We're waiting for the Beis Din to say, because it's the whole calendar that we have comes from a mitzvah. The whole calendar comes from a mitzvah. The origin is a mitzvah. It's not like a secular calendar, which that's the way it is.
That's interesting. Because we declare the new month in shul. We take out the Torahs. We have a special blessing. We do Hallel, right?
Many people fast the day before. Many people have a holiday. It's considered a holiday. Rosh Chodesh is an important thing. Our Rosh Chodesh isn't done completely right, as we'll say later. When you don't have the Beis Din in Jerusalem, then you have to calculate it mathematically. But so our Rosh Chodeshes aren't done. They are established by the Beis Din. The Beis Din back then, the last Beis Din of Rav Yochanan ben Zakkai, they made a calendar because they saw there wouldn't be a future Beis Din. But when Mashiach comes, we'll once again go. People will have to have witnesses and everything like that. Okay, so we're holding in Tanya, in chapter 35. So chapter 35 started off and said, being a Beinoni is very difficult, where you feel that your thought, speech, and action are transformative, or get transformed, and you do a lot of mitzvahs, but you're always on edge and you're always on guard, that that inside there's like a beast, which you don't really transform. So the Alter Rebbe says sometimes a Beinoni might feel like, hey, I'm not really getting anywhere in life. So the Alter Rebbe says this will be the comfort for you, and he brought a mashal from the Zohar. He says the Zohar says that someone asked a child, they said, what did you learn today? He said, I learned that a wise person has his eyes in his head. So the Zohar says, a wise person, who doesn't have their eyes in their head? So it says, basically what it means is it means that a person's head has a yarmulke. You have to keep your head covered because the Shekhinah resides on your head. And a person, a chacham, a wise person, he's always focused on keeping the Shekhinah on his head. That's what it says in the Zohar. So we said that's what a chacham is. A wise person is somebody whose life is centric to keeping the Shekhinah on his head. And there's a parable of we brought a parable of a candle. Just like a candle has a flame on top of its head, the candle requires a wick, which we said a wick is the body, and a candle requires fuel. Fuel are mitzvahs, Torah mitzvahs. So when Jewish person down here who's a wick, which cannot contain fire, does Torah mitzvahs, then it causes the flame of God to reside on his head. And that's what we said. And then we continued on, and we said, even a tzaddik who has complete love of God and he's already totally focused on God, nevertheless, you can always get closer to God. And the closest you can get is through mitzvahs. So even if your soul is shining on you, and even if even though your soul is a part of God, but nevertheless, mitzvahs reach deeper into God. They reach deeper into God, and therefore, and we spoke about last week, and we finished off, and we said the whole world is created from God, but God is hidden. Mitzvahs, God is revealed. So when you do a mitzvah, essentially what you're doing is you're fueling the fire. The soul is able to reside on your head because you're fueling the fire with God's will, God's revealed will. And we mentioned last week that the world is made from God's hidden will. We do not see that God wanted the world. We see that there's a world, and some people say God wanted it, some people say God didn't want it. People are all confused. But mitzvahs, we only do mitzvahs because God wanted them. When you see someone doing a mitzvah, obviously he's doing it because God wanted it, right? Otherwise he wouldn't do it. And obviously there are different levels of mitzvahs. So that's what we explained. We said that through the mitzvahs never change, even when they come here. And through the mitzvahs, that's how our godliness resides on us. And that's where we're holding. So now, it is thus clear, if you're looking, there should be a calendar there, and we're holding at the 18th of Adar. That's where, if you see a calendar there of the daily Tanya.
And the 18th of Adar.
There's two 18th of Adar. One of them is going to be a leap year one, and one of them is going to be a regular. We're at the regular one. Okay. So, the resting of the Shechina means. So now we explain a metaphor that we said the mitzvahs reside. It's really a beautiful thing. The wick cannot really contain fire. And on the contrary, the wick will do a really bad job, right? The wick will do a really bad job. The oil comes and it soaks up the wick. The wick is still the wick, but it soaks up the wick, and now the wick can hold fire. So now we're going to talk about this idea of the Shechina residing on us.
So Vihine, is that?
That's the 18th of Adar, that's where we're holding.
Okay.
So Vihine, Inyan Ashras HaShechina, the resting of the Shechina means, what is the idea of the resting of the Shechina? Okay. This is the revelation of godliness and infinite energy of God in that particular object. So when we do a mitzvah, then the Shechina, God's emanation, the revelation of God, can be in us. This means that the object is comprised within God's light and is nullified out of existence towards Him. So, when someone puts tefillin on, we don't necessarily see the revelation of God. As we'll say later, when Mashiach comes, if we would see the revelation, it would violate our free choice totally, because it would be just too easy to do mitzvahs. But Mashiach comes, we will be able to see it. But in spiritual realms, they see it. And we see it a little bit here. When someone puts tefillin on, no one's going to say like, oh, is that acupuncture? Or like, I'm doing it for acupuncture. There was actually an article that tefillin actually lowers the chances of heart attacks.
Really?
Came out from an article from Cleveland, Ohio. But the idea was basically when you tighten something here, it flexes some nerves, muscle, or whatever it is, and that's what they suggested. So obviously, someone might put tefillin on for that, but that wouldn't need God's name in it, etc., etc. Sha'az hu shasherish miskal abai Hashem echad. So this is, for only then can the one God rest upon that object and reveal Himself. So the only way God can, there's this amazing video this week in Hebrew from an Israeli soldier interview, an amazing video. So he said that he was a Chabad chassid, and he was interviewed, it's in Hebrew, but he was interviewed by a Orthodox reporter. So he said that basically, he said the first day fighting on Simchas Torah, it was hard, but it didn't bother him, so it didn't hit him. Only at night he couldn't sleep, and so he said he woke up in the morning, and he said, I can't daven. I can't stand before God. I'm just too upset. So he was trying to think what to do. Now, there's something that a lot of Chabad Chassidim do, is when they have a question, they would ask the Rebbe. What they do is they take the book of letters from the Rebbe, there's like thousands of letters, and they open it up to like a random, ask the question, open up a random page. So he said that's what he did. It was the morning, he was in his army base, and he had this book of the Rebbe's letters. And the answer in the book said, "Dear so-and-so," whatever it is, "this that you can't pray." This is what the letter said. "This that you can't pray, you have to be someone else to pray. And you have to realize that you're not you, you're a Jew. And then you can pray." So he said it hit him so hard. The Rebbe was saying in the letter, you're saying, you can't pray because you have an ego and you have all these different things. But that's not what prayer is about. You're not you. You're really a Jew. And when you remember you're a Jew, then you can pray. And he said in that moment, he got very emotional. He said, I felt like, okay, I don't have anything on God. That's me. But I'm not really me. I'm really just a Jew. And that's what I am. And when I put away my ego and my personality and everything like that and all my questions, I'm just a Jew. And then I could pray. And he said that was his mind shift. So anyways, here we
answered his question directly.
Answer, and I'm not doing a good job paraphrasing. I think I was kind of taking it. He burst out crying. He's a big muscular guy. Burst out crying while he was saying it. But he was saying that, that was his experience then. That he's like, yeah, I can pray now because I'm not me. My stuff doesn't matter. I'm a Jew, and that's all I am. So here we're saying, basically, if something is not batel, if something is not nullified to God, something has its own character, then God cannot reside in it. Because our own feelings and our own is a blockage. We're absorbed in ourselves. So, okay, so now we're going to say interesting things. So now, when you do mitzvahs, so God can reveal himself. But he can only truly reveal himself if we have no blockages. We have no agenda. We're all really nothing. The whole world is really nothing. God's the only real thing. So as long as we project our existence, we can't really allow God's existence in.
So it's like the opposite of the symptom.
Correct.
God doesn't.
It's like the symptom. God cuts himself out, and now there's an existence.
But we're cutting ourselves out.
So now, if we cut ourselves out, we can. So that is actually in the second chapter of Tanya. It introduces the idea of a Rebbe. A Rebbe is just somebody who you can see God inside of him because he doesn't have any agendas whatsoever. Now, the animal soul causes us that we always have an agenda, and that's what's the hardship of the Beinoni. Now, even a perfect tzaddik who cleaves to him with abundant love, so he's totally nullified, he still can't fully grasp God. The tzaddik gomer, the perfect tzaddik, he feels love to God, and he feels God is everything in totality. Right? He feels God is everything in totality. So even him, the fact that he feels it, that's already an agenda, right? So God is everything, that's already an agenda. So even him, because you can only feel something that you know, and you can't really know God. It's an everlasting, ongoing ladder. So if you love something, then you are a something. You can only feel something if you're a something. So Hashem doesn't completely reveal himself only through mitzvahs. Only when you do mitzvahs, only when he's doing mitzvahs. So even a tzaddik gomer who has zero questions and zero blockages in his system, and again, a Beinoni, it has inborn blockages that he can never get rid of. That's the hardship of a Beinoni. So he has to constantly be breaking out of those inborn blockages, and it's a constant battle. A tzaddik, he doesn't feel blockages. He only feels God. But even still, he has his own avodah of breaking out of what he does feel, and saying I don't want to do this because I see God everywhere. I want to do it even if I don't see God. I want to actually have a sacrifice. So the tzaddik on his own level has to have his own level of sacrifice through Torah and mitzvahs in order to truly connect to God, because so as long as he's doing what's intuitive to him, he's not fully breaking out towards God. He's not fully. So that's what the Alter Rebbe is saying here. Now,
well, you couldn't actually truly be one with God unless you are God. We're human,
Well,
so no matter how much we try to suppress our,
so this is the trick. The trick of being truly one with God is when you do a mitzvah. But after you do the mitzvah, now it becomes you again. It's like in the moment of something that the Rebbe said many times. He said, like in Russia and Inquisition, it was very hard, big challenge to give your life for God. But it's harder in America because then you die. You know, people write a story about you, whatever, inspired. You die doing the greatest mitzvah. But if you have to make a sacrifice today and go back to sleep and then wake up tomorrow, yesterday's sacrifice doesn't count for today. Or you might say, oh, this is so hard for me to do, I did it. But tomorrow you have to grow more because the way human nature is to touch God, it's transcendent. It's like once you do it, now it becomes you already. Now it's comfortable. So you have to always keep going. What we're going to say here is mitzvahs, you have to keep going and you have to go greater and greater and greater. And it's a constant growth. There's never a time where you can essentially pat yourself on the back and say, oh, I did it, now I'm with God. You have to, the next day. So that point of where you totally give up your own self-consciousness and your own selfness is when you're with God. But now you own it. So now you have to do it greater in a greater depth. So we'll talk about it more here.
would it be correct to say that?
So now 1 second. A person cannot reach God. This is an important thing. However, God can reach a person. The mitzvahs are a counterintuitive gift that we can connect to God. In other words, so people would always write to the Rebbe like, oh, why can't I just do my own good in the world? Why do I have to do mitzvahs? And the Rebbe would always say, well, you can't connect to God because you're finite and God's infinite. But God is infinite, so he can choose to connect to you. And what did he choose to connect to you? To make you one with him? The mitzvahs. That's what he chose. So there was there was a famous chassid, and he was a famous teacher in Israel, and he actually made a revolution in Israel, Judaism. So he was once talking about the idea of connecting to a Rebbe, which is in the second chapter of Tanya. So one of the guys said, I don't connect to the Rebbe, I connect to the rabbis in the Talmud. So he said, you want to connect to the rabbis in the Talmud, but who says they want to connect to you? He said, so this is something very fundamental, that mitzvahs are God's gift to us. They are God's conduits. We cannot create a conduit to God because we're always coming from our own self. Only God could say, here, I'll give you a hand, but you have to follow the way I'm giving because, yeah.
So would it be correct? We cannot completely, even a tzaddik, cannot completely suppress their humanity to the extent that they are one with God. So, therefore, the mitzvah is the mechanism or the conduit with which we can, as humans, use our humanity to connect with God.
So we're saying for regular people we can't suppress our humanity, so we need mitzvahs. Here we say even a tzaddik who has no humanity, everything about him is God, even that has levels in it. It's not, he has no sense of self. But because God is infinite, he always has to have even a tzaddik who has no sense of self. So a tzaddik's in a different book. In fact, the Alter Rebbe wrote a different book for tzaddikim.
Really?
It got burned, actually, but this is the book of Beinim, and he wrote a book of tzaddikim. But here he's saying that if a tzaddik who's perfect, and he's totally zero sense of self, but nevertheless he knows that so as long as I'm not breaking out, I'm in my own holy world. Because God is infinite. And if God made us alive, he always wants us to break out. So how much more so a Beinoni who has not changed his animal self, he has to remember, in this chapter, in the next chapter, the Alter Rebbe actually really goes and explains the idea of Mashiach and the idea of how important mitzvahs are. Because basically, even if you're even if someone will be a good person or whatever it is, they haven't left. You might have your consciousness might say, hey, if you do this, you're a good person, and you might be a good person, but you still haven't left. You still haven't connected to God. You still haven't brought the Shekhinah. So it's a very But
I'm just trying to understand the role of mitzvah in this context. So it is because of our human limitations, we can only connect with God to a certain extent. Yeah. We're always going to be limited. So is the mitzvah a way? I mean, I understand it's a commandment, but it's doing more than just. It's a means by which we connect to God.
Correct.
But does it also a means by which God connects to us?
Yes, because that mitzvahs are, in other words, we'll get to the beginning of Tanya, but the beginning of Tanya says something very controversial, and it's always famous, but basically, if you're going to take the role of all human psychology, and it's a very interesting thing, all human psychology is ultimately self-serving. In other words, it's all to get satisfaction, or to feel good about yourself, to do good, to feel good. The Tanya is actually a very radical book in psychological realms. To connect to infinite and totally have no self it has no place in psychology. Viktor Frankl gets the closest, but he's still saying you have to have meaning to be satisfied in life. So what we're saying is God gave a mechanism of mitzvahs, and those mitzvahs, when we're doing them, even though if we would come up with mitzvahs and say, hey, Paul, do this meditation or do this thing, do this good deed, you'll leave yourself, you wouldn't truly leave yourself. Because humans cannot leave, there's no such concept of leaving your consciousness. Right. The Tanya here is saying that through mitzvahs, God is throwing a hook. He's saying, I'm creating a supernatural device in the Jewish realms, a supernatural device where indeed you can leave the world and connect to me. Now, we're going to say that there's limitations. We're going to say that when you do a mitzvah, it's like, it's something unusual when you're doing a mitzvah. It's not something which you can dissect scientifically. It's not a scientific mechanism. It's something which God, and that's why when we get to all the mitzvahs, ultimately the reason why we do them is there's no reason. Because if there was a reason, then you wouldn't really be leaving yourself and connecting to God. And actually, in many places, the Rebbe explains that the purpose of reasons is only you should dig into the reason and find out that the reasons don't really have reasons.
Yeah, and this is why the idea that, mitzvahs are just good deeds.
Correct.
Is a perversion of what mitzvahs really are.
It is. It is inaccurate. And, that's why we always find that people say mitzvahs are good deeds. They always end up choosing which mitzvahs they like and choosing which mitzvahs are good for them. Essentially, they end up choosing which mitzvahs. When they say this is a good deed, they mean this means this is good for me to do. And and now here we're the Alter Rebbe is actually he's saying, by the way, even a tzaddik can never go to sleep. He always has to be active, because a tzaddik has a different thing. A tzaddik, a regular person, if he's empty on mitzvahs, he's going to do selfish things. He's going to do, and again, self-awareness. He's going to have self-awareness. He's not going to be thinking about God. A tzaddik, we're saying, he's always thinking about God. He never stops. But even he knows that if I don't advance and I'm not doing mitzvahs and I'm not leaving my own, then I'm a lofty soul. I'm soaked with godliness, but I'm not connecting to God, because the connecting to God has no end. God is infinite. There's always more. So it's interesting. The different Rebbe's, they sometimes write about